Hello and welcome back. My name is Will. I'm the host of The Bald Book Geek, and I saw a few tweets, one of them by John A. Douglas, a fantastic writer. I will tag him down below. And it got me thinking about Neil Gaiman. Neil Gaiman is a writer I have a very strong love-hate relationship with. When I love his work, I absolutely love it. When I hate his work, I hate it. There is no in-between. And let's talk about it. Is Neil Gaiman overrated? Let's be honest, he's a name that looms so large within the world of literature and popular culture, with a career spanning decades and impressive work such as American Gods and Sandman and Good Omens. And I'm using those as an example, but my favourite book by him is Stardust. He has a huge legions of fans and critical acclaim. However, with many popular figures, there's always the other side of the coin. While many hail Gaiman as a master storyteller, others argue that his work is overrated. And here are the reasons why some critics feel this way. And it was very interesting writing this and trying to keep it as balanced as possible. Because I always say this, Norse mythology is one of my favourite books. I love it. I love Stardust. I love Sandman. The film Mirror Mask is spectacular. Yet, sometimes I feel like when I'm reading his work, I feel like I'm reading a parody of himself. The endlessly repeating themes and mythos of his work. This is one of my bugbears. And one of the main criticisms levelled against him is his tendency to recycle themes across his work. And don't get me wrong, artistic consistency is extremely important. You should know a writer by their work. But like I said at the start, sometimes they feel like a parody of Gaiman himself. He often recycles the themes, and whether it's exploring the mythology, the blending of the fantastical with the mundane, or the journey of the protagonist into a mysterious otherworldly realm, these elements appear frequently across his stories. The consistency is a strength, but it does become a predictable pattern. I can often know exactly what a Neil Gaiman book is going to be like before it even comes out, just by reading the bio. So he is a library writer for me. I rarely if ever buy his work. The repeated themes and mythos get a little bit boring. And I won't lie. Yet, there are writers that do this very well, and there are writers that you know from it. And the problem I have here is that he is so mixed. Like I said, sometimes a book can be fantastic, it will be amazing, yet his other work or another book won't be so good. Or it will be predictable. And often, and this will lead into part 2, style over substance. I will say his poise, and rightly so, is praised for its lyrical quality and imaginative flair. However, many of his critics argue that the stylistic elements sometimes come at the expense of deeper substance. Beautifully crafted sentences and whimsical descriptions can mask what some perceive as a lack of depth of character development or plot complexity. In other words, his books can be more about the aesthetic experience than a profound narrative journey, and this is very true. For me. Like I said, Stardust, I love it. Yet, there are other books that he's done that often follow the same narrative with the same written style and the beautiful descriptions, yet fall flat, because they deliver a shallow story experience. Beautiful poise and descriptives are great, but sometimes you need a bit more depth to back it up, and the inconsistency within his work frustrates me. The sheer popularity of his work can contribute to the perception that he is overrated. When authors achieve a certain level of fame, their work can be surrounded by hype. Hello, Stephen King. And that raises expectations to an unrealistic level. It can lead to disappointment for readers, influenced by the acclaim, anticipate a groundbreaking experience, but then find something more conventional to read. And this is something I've found. A lot of people get into Gaiman and they say, oh, everyone tells me he's amazing. Look at all these Goodreads reviews. They read it and they're disappointed. The thing is, writers do become their own worst enemy sometimes, and the hype of their work and the build of their career, Stephen King, can often mask the fact that maybe they're not as good as people think they are. And by the way, I am a King fan. But, again, inconsistent. Reliant on existing mythologies. Now, this is something I love. His work genuinely draws on existing mythologies, folklore, and literary traditions, while the ability to reimagine and interweave those elements is fantastic. Some critics that I've seen online feel that his reliance on pre-existing narratives limit his originality. By reworking familiar tales, Gaiman is seen to be less inventive than other authors who create entirely new worlds and mythologies from scratch. Now, keeping this quite balanced, I don't see anything wrong with that, but I would love to see something just pour out of his mind sometimes. I love Norse mythology. I think it's a fantastic book, although one of my big bugbears on that book is the fact that he's definitely watched some Marvel movies. But it does feel like sometimes it's a get out of jail free card for creating something where he has it all in front of him and it's ready to go. Inconsistent quality. Gaiman has produced some undeniably brilliant works. Not all of his output hit the same high note. Some of his lesser known novels and short stories failed to capture the magic that characterized his best work. Critics argue that the inconsistency in quality suggests that he is not a literary genius he is often made out to be, but rather a skilled writer of both hit and misses, and I think that's what we need to remember. I don't think he's a literary genius. I've met Neil Gaiman. I've had a pint with Neil Gaiman. He's absolutely wonderful to speak to. Yet, as I can say this, often it feels like the inconsistent quality in his work frustrates me. I made it a thing a few years ago that I read every Neil Gaiman book that I could find, and then some, but the inconsistencies in his work drove me a little bit mad. For every good Neil Gaiman novel I read, I did end up reading 2 or 3 not particularly good ones, or 1 or 2 that felt like they were recycled from the previous one. The inconsistency in quality does frustrate me, but this is true of all writers before people come at me. All writers are inconsistent, especially writers with a back catalogue as large as Gaiman's. So, inconsistent quality, yes, but is he the only one guilty of that? And adaptations and media influence. The numerous adaptations of his work into film, TV, and graphic novels have undoubtedly broadened his audience and expanded his fame. However, this media presence can sometimes overshadow his literary achievements. For some, the commercialization of his work suggests a dilution of artistic integrity, catering to a mainstream taste rather than maintaining a unique voice that initially set him apart. This is true. And, by the way, I don't blame writers for doing this. If someone's going to adapt your work, go for it. But I think sometimes it can dilute work. I think sometimes it can make the work feel a little bit, diluted and a little bit flat, because there's always going to be something lost in adaptation. And I remember not that long ago, especially when Stardust came out, which is a great movie, by the way, his work was basically everywhere. And I'm going to add my own little 10 cents. I've spent way too long writing this, and I forgot to put this in. I think one of the things that bugs me the most when it comes to Neil Gaiman, and I think I touched upon it, but it is the inconsistency. But I think, like I said, many writers are inconsistent, especially with bibliographies as large as his, but I also feel like I would love to just have something pouring out of his mind. I think the closest we've ever got to that was Stardust, although Sandman. It draws from his work, it draws from mythologies, yet it keeps it very much his own world, his own characters, and his own stories. I always find it interesting when a film or adaptation or something about his work comes out and then all of a sudden his work is everywhere. The supermarket, the W.H. Smiths, the Waterstones, the Baldur's books, Amazon ad pages. And it does feel like, let's try and milk this content. And it's kind of a shame. I think Neil Gaiman's talent as a storyteller is undeniable, and his influence on modern fantasy and science fiction is extremely significant. However, the notion of him being overrated stems from the blend of repetitive themes, an imbalance between style and substance, inconsistent quality, and the impact of his widespread appeal. As with any artist, opinions on his work are completely subjective, and some may find his stories enchanting and profound, others may see them as overhyped and lacking originality. Ultimately, whether Neil Gaiman is overrated or not is a matter of personal taste, but I'm trying to, in this discussion, highlight the diverse perspective on literature can inspire, and that's what I find quite interesting with his work. And I'm also, will say, as someone who has dived in and out of his work, read cover to cover, I definitely have my favourites. I have books on my shelf by him that I revisit. I have stories that I love by him that I will listen to on Audible. And before everyone gets mad, you can criticise the media that you consume. But with Gaiman as a writer, I think one of the things that I will always say is there is a talent there. But you don't always have to like everything a writer creates. I think undeniably he's brilliant in many ways, but in other ways he's lacking. So I do wonder, when it comes to writers and who they are and what they create, the mixed opinions on them I find fascinating. I have this same relationship with Stephen King, for example. Inconsistent work, and sometimes work that I find derivative and boring. And I think that's true of every writer with bibliographies as big as these. Like I said, and let's be real, this is completely subjective opinion, and I think a good perspective on that is good. I think as a writer, I've learnt a lot from him, but there are definitely books that I've read by him that just make me go, why did I even bother? And there have even been a handful of books I DNF'd because I just couldn't sit through them any longer because they were driving me a little bit insane. So, tell me what you think in the comments below. I will talk to you guys later, and have a wonderful day.